In this video, we'll walk through the 4 principles of design and how to use them in our presentations. The principles are laid out in a book called The Non-Designer's Design Book by Robin Williams. A link to the book is in the description of this video. The principles, proximity, alignment, repetition, and contrast, will be explored individually, and then we'll also view those principles in a presentation that was created by a professional designer. And finally, we'll make use of a grid when we design a presentation. That'll make this process a lot more seamless for you and enable you to know which principles you are applying when you create your next presentation. So we'll begin with a basic example and then walk through some examples with text and with images to work through each of the 4 principles. The first principle that we'll examine is proximity. So as we see here, we have grouped different elements on this screen, and that is using the principle of proximity, which states you group related items together. Now, proximity doesn't mean that everything is close together. It means items that are closer together create groups of information, and that, in turn, provides clarity. So the basic purpose of proximity is to organize. Grouping related items together automatically creates organization in the brain. So here we have 4 different groups of information. Each one is related to that little element by itself. The next principle is alignment. The principle of alignment states nothing should be placed on the page arbitrarily. So alignment doesn't mean everything is aligned along one line. It means every item on the slide is visually connected to some other item. Now, a good guideline is to stick to one text alignment on a slide like we see here, flush left, flush right, or centered. The basic purpose of alignment is to unify and organize the page. We have a little subtle difference here with our next principle, which is the principle of repetition. And the principle of repetition states that you repeat some aspect of the design throughout the entire piece. Repetition does not mean it all looks the same. It means you have a consistent look that ties your slides together. That can be done with font, with spacing, how you align items. So in this little example here, what we've done is we have a repeating element with our new graphic that we put in here, the check mark, but we also have repeated the amount of space between each block of text. So repetition is a consistent effort, rather a conscious effort, to unify all parts of a design. And the basic purpose of repetition is to unify and to add visual interest. And our 4th and last principle is probably the most important, and that's the principle of contrast. And that states that if 2 items are not exactly the same, then make them different, really different. Contrast doesn't mean everything is big. It means there's a contrast between elements, and its point is to provide clarity. If the 2 elements are sort of different, but not really, then you don't have contrast. You have conflict. It'll be harder for somebody to understand your message. The basic purpose of contrast is twofold: create interest on the slide and aid in the organization of the slide. Now we'll take an example where we have some text on the screen here. So what we want to do is walk through the 4 principles. And one of the tools I always recommend to make it easier to design in a more effective manner is an add-in by BrightSlide. And information's in the description for the video where you can download it. And we're going to turn on guides. So we're going to create a guide, and I'm going to add it to the normal view here. And we're going to have a 3 by 3 columns and 3 rows. And we have some margins across the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. So I'm going to click OK here. And so what this guide will allow us to do is see these principles in action. And I always recommend when you're creating a slide deck, turn on guides, so then it makes it easier for you to lay things out on your slide accordingly. So if we take a look at the first principle, which is the principle of proximity again, we see here that we have now made a few changes to this slide. And what we did is we grouped Learning the principles, number one, recognizing when you're not using them is a second group, and our third group is applying the principles. And we did that by creating space between each of the 3 points here in learning how to design effectively. So that proximity shows you that they're simpler than you might think is related to learn the principles. So the subtext is related to the text above it that's bolded. So that's proximity. Our next order of design would be alignment. So if we take a look here, we have now aligned everything to the left using our guide here on this little left flush gutter. So the little blue line here, everything is lined up accordingly to that. And so now what we've done is we've used alignment to give us some order here on the slide, and we've have everything flush left. If we look at the repetition component, we've made some different changes. So first is we're using the same type of font for our title, Good Design is Easy As, and each of our 3 items, our 3 steps. So they use the same font. So you have repetition there to show a relationship. We've also had repetition in the space in between step 1, step 2, and step 3. They are equally spaced between one another. So again, making it easier for the eye to read the slide and gather the information. And then fourth is contrast. So here we've done a few different things. Number one, we have added a larger number, so 1, 2, and 3, you see them on the left. We have added some imagery on the right, and we've tied in the image, the color of her slacks, to the learn, recognize, and apply, which are really the 3 main points that we want people to get from this slide. If you learn the principles, recognize when they're not being used, and then applying the principles, you'll greatly improve your design skills. So we've tied in the color for learn, recognize, and apply to make them stand out. That's the contrast we're looking for. So you can use contrast in many different ways. This is one example. Another example is we've put in a gray background to provide some more emphasis to the image, and also tied in the gray with the numbers themselves. Third option, we change the numbers to colors 1, 2, and 3. Those match the colors of the slacks, and we took away the color from learn, recognize, and apply. So really, when you're dealing with contrast, it's play around with different design concepts and then see which one speaks the most to you that's easiest to understand the information. And for me, I thought this one did the best job, because you instantly see learn, recognize, and apply, and that speaks to you very quickly with that contrasting colors that we utilized on the slide. So basic example here to see the principles in action. Our next step, we'll take a professional design slide deck and show the principles in action on that slide deck. So let's take a look at a professionally designed slide deck, and the link to this design is in the description as well for you. And this is a pattern that I use a lot. So not being a professional trained designer, I'm a normal business person like you, but what I do to create better presentations in my career as a consultant is I go take a look at a lot of different designs out there, see what I like, and then pick them apart by using the 4 principles that we've discussed. So this slide deck here, let's just run through the slides real quick. I took a sampling of this slide deck. There's 41 slides on the deck itself. I'm just going to walk through about 6 or 7. You have your title slide, an introduction about this design firm, providing some numbers about the projects that they've done and positive clients that they have. Next up is the services that they offer. Then they dig into a couple case studies of the projects that they've done here. Then we take a look at their way that they work with their clients. It's a 4-step process they go through: meet and greet, ideas, concept, design, and then build and install. Some proof statements from their clients, and then finally the contact us. So we have these slides here that we'll walk through. And the technique that I use to see how are they applying those principles and what can I learn from them is to go back to where we have the grid active. So here we see the grid, and let's kind of point out some of the concepts here that are in use on this title slide. So first is the concept of proximity, and we see the big word cozy and the architecture agency presentation. They're grouped together. So that is the main point of the slide here. It's an architecture agency presentation, and the name of the agency is Cozy. We see some other elements here that are aligned, center alignment for those, but then you have your logo and the studio name on the left-hand side and just a slide number on the right-hand side. We'll want to see if they're have good repetition going from slide to slide and what they choose to repeat throughout it, and then the contrast. So here cozy is very large, architecture agency presentation text is much smaller. You have some contrast with the white background and the dark logo and the dark numbers here, and then of course you have the contrast with the image behind the text itself. If we take a look at the first slide, we'll see that the alignment here on the right-hand side, you have the logo and the name of the agency. If we make our way just to the left of it, we see that there's some left-hand alignment here between the title and the text. And then the text below is center aligned with the numbers corresponding to them. And you're getting the contrast because of the difference in the color, as well as the difference in the size of the title and the text that goes with the title. And then you have some good imagery to provide some contrast as well in the slide. They're showing a very professional image of some of their works. A lot of imagery in this slide deck. And a nice little design treatment here with the faded white box as well. And what that does, provide some contrast for you between the text and the image itself, but they also use it as an alignment tool. So you see here, the top of the box is aligned to the bottom of the image. And then you have some header spacing before you have your text here. The bottom part here goes up to the second letter of the logo. It doesn't go all the way down to the header. So just a little bit of tie-in for alignment on the slide by using this little white box with transparency. Typical slide in our slide decks are the services that we offer. So repetition of the slide deck so far, we're seeing the same fonts, obviously. We have, if we go back to this other one, same size, more or less, for the title. They're tying in the lines here with the little line that we see below it. You have the same fonts for the titles, and they're bolded as well. And then you have an unbolded font below it, so that's consistent with what we saw on the other slides. And then you have some icons here to the left. But we see here proximity, interior design, design and architecture, construction and building design, equally spaced out, right? So you have the proximity of things together, but you also have the alignment, they're left aligned. And then you also have the repetition with the spacing and the use of the bolds that we're seeing from slide to slide. A good contrast here too with the bolding, the icons, and the imagery. If we go into our case study, there's that line again, some repetitive elements there, repetitive elements with the fonts for the title, the sub title here, and then repetition with that light color of gray. The spacing between the image and the text, that's been consistent too. You've seen a spacing about the same type of either height or width. There's another way to frame your text here with that white transparent box, so that really sets the eye here for the Woody Architecture building. Left aligned is the consistent alignment of the text that they're going for. Next one, so it's a different way to do a case study. Imagery on the right, they have some nice treatments on the imagery here. But again, left aligned text, tying in with the brown line here. They're not going all the way to the left of the slide. They're always kind of going up to the gutter. The only thing that really goes beyond the gutters are images and then the logo. But the logo is encapsulated to where it's not too far to the gutter as well. And that just gives your eye some good balance here. So there's plenty of space for the logo and the end of the slide. So they're making good use of that space, white space, throughout this deck. And the only reason that you can become better at using white space to guide the eye is by using these grids. That's why they're so important. You can really see things laid out very easily in the sections of these 3x3 columns and rows. If we go to the next one, again, so our titles here in the top right of our 3x3. Everything's left aligned. You have that brown line here. They're tying in the brown line to go down between the numbers, and the colors are the same as well, so more consistency there. And then your image on the right-hand side. If you notice the image size, so here on the right-hand side is just in between the two gutter lines here on the grid. Let's go take a look at this one. This one goes all the way flush. So a little bit of a difference there, but it's still in line with that column here. It doesn't bleed heavily into the other column. Here, they made a conscious choice to have this whole image goes over here to the second gutter, and then the text here on the left-hand side. So you're seeing repetition doesn't have to be the same thing, but it's in the same strategy of image on the right-hand side, text on the left, and having spacing between them. So the consistency of repetition when they're showing their process of working with the clients, the only thing that's changing is the image, but it stays the same size, and then they go to the next step and bold that step. So here we see that image is always the same size, and there's the bolding changing. If we take a look at what our clients say about a slide, so it's a completely different design concept using color, gray on the background, but now they've tied in this little ruler effect here at the top and the bottom, and that was put into play in the home slide as well. So here we have the ruler on the top. So they went back to that, tied that in there. Again, the brown lines, the header is the same font, and the same fonts with some bold below with the name of their customer. And then finally, the contact us. Again, the transparent white box, images on the right-hand side, not going all the way to the end, a nice large image to show one of their works that they've done, and then the consistent use of the fonts. So the grids really allow you to put these principles in play and learn how professional designers lay out their slides and their slide deck. And that's the power of becoming better at design, is seeing good examples of it, but then asking yourself the questions. Are they using proximity? How are they using alignment? What's the repetition that they're taking from slide to slide? And then finally the contrast. How does it really get some good oomph in their slides to take your eye where they want you to go and understand what they're trying to convey by the use of contrast. And now that we have a high-level understanding of the 4 principles of design, we can turn our attention to how can we tell a better story? How can we be more persuasive in our presentations? So that will be the topic of our next video.